So hi, welcome to Anchor Reviews. This is Tyler from Anchor Reviews, and this is my review on the Elvis biopic movie that recently came out. This movie was supposed to come out, I believe, back in October of last year, but because of the pandemic and various other movie projects getting delayed and postponed because of that, it finally got released this summer of 2022, and it's basically what you expect for a biopic on Elvis and any kind of famous singer. It shows the highs and lows of the famous singer, Elvis Presley, played by Austin Butler, but it's told more through the perspective of his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, played by Tom Hanks. And I would have to say that this is a pretty solid movie. I remember seeing the trailers for this, I'm like, okay, it looks pretty entertaining, and the main reason why I saw this movie was the fact that my grandma is a diehard Elvis fan, and she wanted to see this movie, and I decided to take her to go see it, and she enjoyed it a lot, and that made me pretty happy. And personally myself, I would have to say that this is a solid movie. Now, this is directed and co-written by Baz Luhrmann, who directed movies like Romeo and Juliet, The Great Gatsby, and Moulin Rouge. And the thing is that, in a way, it does remind me of ways of The Great Gatsby. It does have that visual flair to it, as well as the emphasis on music. And this time it does make more sense to add music to it because, well, it's based on the historic life of an actual famous singer. And I'll get back to the music later, but I just want to say that Austin Butler, I'd never really heard of this guy, but this guy really knocked it out of the ballpark for portraying Elvis Presley. A lot of times, yeah, he did look like Elvis Presley, and he did have the voice down too. And on top of that, his mannerisms and the way he sung, as well as his body language, I felt like was excellent. And yeah, really kudos to him for really nailing it pretty hard. And Tom Hanks as the Colonel guy, he did a pretty solid job. I get why people would say like, oh, maybe the whole voice thing is a little gimmicky, but I don't know exactly how this Colonel character sounded. I know he wasn't technically a colonel. They get later into the movie about how his whole history was pretty much a lie, which is a mild spoiler, but this is based on a true story, so it's not really spoiling anything if you look into history for a bit. But I was amused by some of the cast of some of the minor actors. For example, we see Richard Roxburgh playing Elvis's father, and also we got David Wyndham playing a singer named Hank Snow, who was the guy that was singing as the front runner for these performances, and then Elvis was performing with him, and then eventually he became bigger than him. And the thing is, the reason why I'm bringing these actors up is that I recognize Richard Roxburgh as he played Dracula from Van Helsing, and also Dave Wyndham was also in Van Helsing as Carl the Friar, and I absolutely love Van Helsing, and it just brought a smile to my face every time I saw him on screen, because what are the odds of these two actors who were in a movie that I love are in this movie together? But anyway, I remember another face I recognized was Olivia D Judge. I'm sorry if I mispronounced her last name, sorry. As Priscilla Presley. I haven't seen her in a movie since The Visit. That was that M. Night Shyamalan movie that was like found footage in that. And I thought she did a pretty good job too as Priscilla. I mean, there were some times in her mannerisms and kind of her youth that felt like, yeah, maybe she was a little bit too young to play this character. She felt too much like, oh, she's part of like Gen Z in that, which is kind of a given if you're going to make a biopic movie from like, generations apart. That's going to happen. I just want to point that out. It was noticeable, but anyway, I digress. I think my biggest problem with this movie isn't necessarily the runtime, is that the choice of music. Now, this is an issue I had with the director's previous movie, The Great Gatsby, where he was like, oh, let's just put a bunch of music in here that shouldn't exist for like roughly 100 years into the soundtrack for the movie, and it's like, this shouldn't exist in the 1920s. And there are times where we have like music from nowadays, like rap music and hip-hop music, that shouldn't exist in like the 1950s to the 1970s. And I'm aware that it wasn't as bad like it was in The Great Gatsby, but for me it was like, it just took me out of the moment, because when I watch a period piece movie, I don't want to have music from nowadays. I want to have music from that time period. Okay, if I'm watching a movie about the ancient Roman Empire and having like a coliseum full of gladiators fighting, I don't want to hear Smash Mouth blaring on the speakers, okay? But when the music works towards this movie's favor, I gotta say it really does it very well, because Elvis did had a very excellent discography. There's a lot of great music tracks. I would say my favorite Elvis song would have to be Suspicious Minds, and it's used in great effect when Elvis is doing a performance and then his manager decides to go behind his back and write a contract without his permission. And just one of the many examples of this Colonel guy being a slimy businessman, which happens a lot of times for many other singers in that. So overall, I would say that Elvis is a pretty solid movie. And there was a lot of old people that went to go see this movie when I took my grandma to see it. In a way, it reminded me of when I went to go see Maleficent back in 2014. There were a lot of older people who saw it because the people who saw Maleficent must have saw Disney's Sleeping Beauty back in the 1950s when that came out and they were kids. So the demographic where the people went to go see this movie, along with my grandma, were young when Elvis was alive and big at the time singing, so which makes sense. And I would say whether you're from that generation or from nowadays, you'll like this movie a good amount. I would say, yeah, maybe the length a little bit can be iffy at times, but then again, it's a biopic movie. Sometimes I felt the length a little bit towards the second half of it. Not as bad as The Batman, but I did notice at times. Yeah, the music, some of the music choices took me out of it from time to time. But yeah, very nice performances from the main cast and really nice music choices, at least for the ones that should be there by Elvis Presley. And some good visual style from the director, minus, again, the music choices. And it's a fairly, enjoyable movie. And I know there's been a whole trend of biopic movies on famous singers, so I'm just wondering to see what they're going to come up with next, at least Hollywood for that matter. So as for Elvis, I would give it about 3 stars out of 4. So anyway, this is Tyler from Anchor Reviews, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of After the Credits on Anchor Reviews. Please like and subscribe.